Hello, it's Aaron Renn. Welcome back to the podcast. My guest today is Daniel Hess. He is the person behind the well known Twitter account More Births. He also has a Substack called More Births. Obviously, it's about the decline in fertility, which is a subject, as you know, I'm very interested in. And so I invited him on the show to talk about it. And there's links to both his Twitter account, now X account, and his Substack in the show notes. Dan, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks.
There are a lot of people already writing on this issue. So it's already, I don't know if it's a crowded field, but it's one that people were in. You are not a think tanker or a demographer by training. So this was something you had a passion about. And yet you were actually been pretty successful at getting attention and calling it out. What drew your attention into this field? What got you passionate about this?
Well, first, I was actually interested, even going back about 20 years or so, in investing, and then I saw there's some countries that just have these incredibly low birth rates. At the time, it was just countries like Germany and Japan. Now it's a whole lot more countries, but I saw the world of investing sits on this larger tectonic plates of demography, and then since about 2015, fertility rates, birth rates around the world have just totally collapsed, to just incredibly low levels, to the point where this is a real crisis in virtually every developed country, uh, down the line. We're the trajectory of progress itself is in question now. So this is very, very serious.
Yeah, and do you have children yourself by any chance?
We have six. So there, it's an interesting story there. We had four. So my wife and I, we married relatively young by today's standards. I mean, this was just about 20 years ago. So we're just about to round out our 20th anniversary. I was 26, she was 23. That's pretty unusual now, but that's when we married. We had four, and then it completely kicked our ass,
Hmm.
kicked our butt. And that seemed like a lot. And then we were in a neighborhood pool community, a swimming pool community, and it just happened that there were, in that particular community pool, it was a small community pool, but there was all these Orthodox Catholic families that had 9, 10, or two families had 11 children, and these were not people that were any more wealthy than we were, but that kind of made me think, hey, we can, our family is not as gigantic as I thought at four, and we saw people making it work, and I said, so we had this gap. We were not kicked in the stomach for a little while, but then since we married young enough, we were able to get back for another round. We had two more much later. So there's the ages of our kids are uh, 18, 16, 15, and 13, and then 6 and 3. So we have that big gap there, where we kind of thought we were done at four, and then we got to know some amazing families that showed us that more is possible.
Yeah, so you're buying your own product. In other words, you have skin in the game.
Oh, sure, sure.
And it goes. I think it is interesting too because you think about more births. One of the things that caused more births for you was being around people who had more kids. I think everything spreads through social networks. So that's kind of an interesting data point for you right there, I
Oh,
guess.
yes, yeah. Fertility is very contagious, and also, large families have actually a tremendous impact, because if somebody has 8 or 9 kids, then sort of the normies who have just 2 kids think they can go for 3 or 4, and it's not strange at all.
Hmm.
So that's a really, there's a really powerful knock-on effect. I mean, and I see in different communities, often there was one family uh, that became that they went big early on, and then a lot of other younger families saw that, and saw they could make that work, and so often you have one large family that's a little senior in the community, and then you have a bunch of a little bit younger families that see what can be possible.
Why do you say we need more births?
So yeah, that's a very big question, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions about how the world works, and so I think we need to clear the air about that because there is this notion that in the future, the world's overpopulated, people say, and there's too many people. There, some people say, and people have this Malthusian idea. So we know of Thomas Malthus, right? He was the economist from the 1800s, um, who who imagined a world of competing resources, where the more people you have, the less resources each individual person has. But that turns out to be completely untrue. And I have this book, this wonderful book by this is Julian Simon's book. It's called The Ultimate Resource.
It's a
Um,
phenomenal book. I've
yeah,
got a copy
highly
myself.
highly recommended. And so he was coming on the heels of the population bomb. So the population bomb was Paul Ehrlich's, scary, terrifying book that says by 1980 the battle for human survival is going to be over because everybody's going to be starving, and I guess we're going to resort to cannibalism or something like that. It turned out that the people not only were feeding themselves, but better than ever before. And the reason is that in the kind of world that we have, a lot of smart people collaborating together results in more prosperity per person. So you have the per capita, in not just merely the total economy, but each individual person has been better off as populations have been growing. So that's a remarkable phenomenon. It's very counterintuitive. Everybody has this notion that if there's more people, will be will everybody will have less, but actually the opposite's true. But then what that also means is that when you have demographic decline, everybody's not going to be richer, and you're not going to have some Star Trek amazing future with 1/10 the population and everybody going out to the stars. There's this technological pyramid. There's economies of scale where if you take away a lot of people, especially the most economically productive people in all the developed countries, uh, you're not going to get this advanced future. You're going to get literal civilizational decline. And the what can here I'll give a quiz question for you. What is the country that has the highest patent output per capita?
Hmm. Uh, I don't know. Switzerland.
No, it is South Korea.
No.
A follow up question: what is the country with the lowest birth rates of all the countries in the world?
South Korea.
Right. And this is a part of why the problem is even more serious than people realize, because it's actually the very countries uh, that are leading the global economy in so many ways that all have these incredibly low birth rates. The most educated, the most technological countries. So that makes the problem a lot more severe than you would think just by the raw numbers. But we live in a world where we take human progress for granted. So can we imagine the human progress itself could stop advancing? Because that's not only is that possible, that is a guarantee if we continue on this trajectory.
It's very
So,
hard for us to imagine uh, that there isn't a certain amount of finite resources. So thinking about Julian Simon's book, I think our natural inclination is to think there's some finite amount of resources, some finite amount of stuff. And if we have too many people, they have to have less and less and less stuff. Whereas in fact, human beings produce more resources as there's more of us. I think he's quoting Henry George in the book when it's if you get more chicken hawks, you get fewer chickens. But if you get more people, you get more chickens. We actually
oh yeah,
we actually produce more food when there's more of us. And we
oh
learn how to
yeah,
produce it more efficiently. And there's technological breakthroughs.
right, right. And we aren't. You have Elon Musk talking about, he's sending messages about, on Twitter and other places about energy, and like we aren't anywhere close to capturing the amount of energy that is out there. We're just from the sun, from how we burn it, just burning fossil fuels is, to his mind, incredibly primitive, and we're capturing maybe uh, you know just a tiny speck of the solar energy that reaches us. And if we just capture that, more of that energy alone, we'd have, such extreme energy abundance without any without any need to burn, very much fossil fuel. I mean, maybe still for your rockets, your airplanes, I don't know if you're going to have a battery powered, solar powered airplane anytime soon, but but in most usages, we can have incredible abundance, assuming you have enough people who are who are talented and educated and capable enough to continue this process that we've had for 250, 300 years since the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah. So, I mean, how severe is this fertility crisis really? I mean, is this like maybe? I mean, what happens if we don't do anything? Basically, okay, I get it. Maybe we won't colonize Mars or something like Elon Musk wants to do. Maybe we won't have all these fantastic new technologies, but our existing technology and standard of living is pretty good. What what are really the implications if the birth rates don't improve?
Well, okay, yeah, there's a couple things. Well, first, I want to backtrack just a little bit and talk about you're familiar with total fertility rate, but your listeners may not be. Uh, I'm sure some of them are, but I'm sure you have
Go ahead and
an
explain it
excellent
to them.
collection of listeners. But listeners, but so we consider we measure something called total fertility rate, which is kind of a composite of you know eh, the way conditions are, how many children a woman would have throughout her reproductive years in the current, if she went through her reproductive years as things are in the current year. So it's kind of a composite measure of what fertility rates across all the age groups look like today. And so replacement is regarded as about 2.1 births per woman. That's so you're above that, your population will be growing. You're below that, your population will be shrinking over time. And what's happened, since for most of the last 100 years, but especially there's been incredible acceleration since 2007, and especially even more since 2015 or so. We're just seeing a total collapse in fertility rates. So you have a lot of countries, really advanced countries uh, that are major players in the world economy with fertility rates as low as 1.0 or below. That means every generation is half the size of the generation before it. So that's maybe just a generation is maybe 30 years. So if you play that forward a couple generations, you're looking at national collapse of
Hmm.
many countries. And even before that happens, you're going to have very severe other effects. For example, your asset classes, stocks, real estate, uh, cannot earn a positive return if there are more sellers than buyers, and buyers are the young people, are the next generation. The retirees are the older generation. We know what happens with real estate in places where that are in demographic decline. You can take your pick: West Virginia, Detroit, rural Japan. What happens if there's way too many, way more sellers than buyers because there's demographic decline? Prices can go all the way to zero on real estate. Can you imagine? That's most households the number one asset class. Stocks have a related story, but I mean, now economics isn't the be all end all, but you will have you know economic crisis beyond anybody's imagining. That's just part of it, but a bigger part is, as I was saying, the kind of the rise and forward march of civilization, which whether you're a Christian or an atheist or a Buddhist or whatever, we all have this other religion or other belief system that we don't even think it's a belief system, but it's the kind of the belief in progress. That's part of everybody's lifetime experience. The next cell phone is going to be more whiz bang than the last one. We're going to uh, have more amazing satellites, more incredible everything. That's our whole life experience. Can we imagine a world that stops getting better, that stops having progress. If you're in, one thing that there's an amazing futurist. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but Robin Hanson, he's made an excellent economic point about how technology is kind of is stacked on a pyramid of that where the base is a large population. You get economies of scale, you have specialization, and you lose a lot of economies of scale and a lot of specialization with a smaller population. So the result is that you can't reach as high technologically. We know of the Dark Ages, but you know what the Dark Ages really was? It was just the population during that period of time in history was about 1/10 of what it had been, in the golden ages before, and so you could not sustain the progress that you had gained. So a lot of progress was lost, and that was primarily simply a function of much smaller populations. You can't, civilization itself, the height of civilization is really related to the size of the base of the pyramid, if you will, which is the population.
Yeah, you think about Adam Smith's pin factory or whatever, where you want to have specialization and division of labor, you have to have a lot of people to do that. And that's why if you want to buy like certain obscure products, you need to be in a big city. You need big markets, big division, to create demand. You need big division, big markets to have division of labor to allow people to specialize. The one that I find, from my study of sort of Rust Belt America, is so many of our costs in society are essentially fixed costs. Think about the national debt. What is it, $38 trillion? I mean, if we cut the population of our country in half, now we all owe twice as big a share as that national debt. The debt doesn't go down, right? The number of interstate highway miles that we need to maintain doesn't go down. And it's kind of well known that cities, when they shrink, have big problems because the physical infrastructure is fixed, and therefore houses start getting abandoned, streets start going potholes.
Right.
You have financial crunch in the city, which means your services start going bad, and it's very difficult to shrink when you have a lot of fixed costs, and we have a lot of fixed costs to sustain society.
Yeah, it's going down is not going to be the same as going up, because you're going to have you're going to have societies full of elderly workers, elderly people, most of them not workers anymore, depending on which country you're talking about. Yeah, you're the on the one hand, Trump talks about this big beautiful bill. Elon Musk is pulling his hair out about the cost of it and future deficits, but the underlying force behind that, it has a lot to do with demography. We have, the baby boomers are in the thick of retirement now. This is the largest generation in history, and they have, huge, the largest share of government spending is entitlements to older people, Medicare, Social Security, are among the largest expenses, and every country is like this in its own way. So this is, and we're not even very far along in this story here, and already the debts are shocking, and we're not even in one of the older countries. I mean, can you imagine Germany or Japan or countries like this are much older than we are. So we haven't gotten there yet, and already we're in a having what seems like the emergence of a debt crisis.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. You mentioned like South Korea. What are the countries that have the worst birth rate problems, worst fertility issues?
Well, at first we were able to just talk about a handful of countries. Unfortunately, more and more countries are joining the ranks. Here's like Chile is at 1.1 births per woman. Colombia is at 1.2. Can you imagine this? Nobody realizes this. Mexico is at 1.45. China is around 1.0. Now that's extremely significant because, depending on how you measure it, China's the first or second largest economy in the world. So that's the largest, number one or number two economy in the world is the work base is shrinking by 50% every year. And now there's a country that cannot have any hope of, even if they decide one day that immigration is the answer. This is China we're talking about. Hardly anybody wants to, move to China where the language and culture are so difficult to manage, even if they, a very small fraction of people are even able to fit in that country. But, Poland is around 1.0. Italy and Spain are around 1.1 right now. And these numbers are probably lower than you thought. And the reason is that, just in the last 5 years since 2020, there's been, very serious further legs down. So this is not a static problem. If we could lock current fertility rates in amber, we could somehow, try to muddle through. But what we have to realize is that even, I'm looking at the newest data from 2025. You can get the first 3, 4, 5 months already are giving a new indication. And I'm sorry to say, but, we're down by, 4 or 5 and 10% in a lot of countries. America is down only 0.5%. So America is actually, and one thing that I want to point out in all this is that as bad as things are in America, and to be fair, our fertility rate, which was 1.59 in 2024, is not great. Yet we are in a better demographic situation than almost every country in Europe, almost every country in East Asia. So we're, as an investor would say, we're the cleanest dirty shirt in the laundry basket. So,
Yeah.
So we're not the worst of it, but we are incredibly dependent on countries that face, a dramatic collapse. Look at let's look at, think about a little bit of manufacturing for a minute. The smallest, difficult to manufacture, amazing product that we have are the chips that go into AI and, the LCD screens and, cell phones. That is manufactured almost 100% in Korea, Taiwan, some in China. These are the countries with fertility rates of 1.0 and below. And what is the largest sophisticated thing that mankind builds? You want to throw a guess out there?
The
The
largest
large,
ships.
yeah, these giant container ships. Do you know who
Yeah.
makes? You know what the American share of ship manufacturing is?
Yeah. It's like very low.
It's like a 0.01% or something like that. So virtually 100% is produced in, Taiwan, South Korea, China, all countries in steep demographic collapse. So uh, that's not we can't just, onshore that very easily. I mean, that's a whole massive economic infrastructure. I can't even imagine, and that's just two realms, and imagine everything in between. So we're highly economically dependent on countries that are, we're in demographic decline, but countries that are falling off a demographic cliff are the countries we so deeply depend on.
Yeah. What are the factors driving this fertility decline? Because you mentioned it's a global phenomenon, so it can't just be Hollywood shows or feminism or whatever. Like, what are all these usual culprits that people throw out there? Because it's hitting everybody basically. I mean, even Iran, which is like in theory like a theocracy, has collapsing birth rates.
So yeah, I talk about a fertility stack because it is multifactored, and this makes it, kind of more frustrating and more difficult for people to think about, because people want to, point to one thing. What is the root cause? But actually, it is several things. It's people no longer, believe as strongly, in children. Pro-natal beliefs, as I would say, are weaker. Marriage is a lot less common, and it happens much later in life. One primary cause um, is the fact that it takes so much longer to get educated, and then on top of that, fit into the economy, where our total economy is more wealthy, than ever before. But that is not. But young people in their 20s and 30s are, their share of the national income is probably lower than or certainly national wealth is lower than before, because it just takes a long time, to climb the ladder, and that is exacerbated by, kind of uh, an arms race in education. So, you could, a high school diploma meant something at one time. It means absolutely nothing now. No one anywhere is impressed by a high school diploma. I mean, a lot of employers aren't even impressed with a 4-year degree, and so people are going to grad school, getting a PhD. Now you're 30, and for a woman, in her early 30s, she is 2/3 less fecund. That is she is 2/3 less able to get pregnant in a given month than when she was in her early 20s. Already, so that's just finishing grad school, and you haven't even started to work yet. So that's a big part of it. And another point is housing as well. So there are all these factors, but so I want to talk about each of these a little bit, if I may.
Sure,
Um,
please do.
yeah. So the first factor I like to talk about actually is pronatal belief. Um, and the reason I talk about that is, there is one country among all the 30 something OECD countries, all of the developed countries in the world. There is exactly one country that has above replacement fertility. Do you know what that country is?
Israel?
That is Israel. And, that's a very curious case, because Israel's fertility rate is around 3, maybe a little bit less. And it's actually been going up over the last 30 years. Meanwhile, for rich countries, the average is around 1.5 or less, maybe 1.4, 1.3 now. For your average in sort of the developed countries, so they're more than twice as high. And what is the answer? What is the reason? It really, because Israel is highly educated, houses are extremely expensive, it's crowded. Women are educated more than men, so people who blame women's education will look at Israel. So what is the answer? And I've studied this, talk to people endlessly, tried to understand the reason. Seems to come down to very intense and heartfelt, pronatal belief, literal belief, uh, in the importance of having a lot of children as a national cause. Golda Meir, David Ben Gurion, the founders of Israel, were extremely explicit about that. So that seems to be, that you can just do things. You can just believe in having children. It seems kind of reductive, but that seems actually true. And the strongest piece of evidence is actually from the opposite, which is that many countries in the 20th century, Japan, South Korea, China, Thailand, Iran, so many countries had direct campaigns to educate their people about overpopulation, in response often to Paul Ehrlich himself and his scaremongering. Many countries, rolled out these campaigns asking people to have less children. And those campaigns were incredibly and instantly successful. I mean, you had countries, dropping from 6 births per woman to 3, to, down to 1 and below, like in a matter of a decade or two. So the power of pronatalism, I think, is best, power of belief in the importance of having children, I think, is best exemplified actually by the opposite. So that's the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first point. The next point is marriage. So marriage is huge, and it's you can see that, now, that does again connect to pronatal belief, because why should people get married? I think for me, the number one reason to get married is for family and for children. That's what it always was, and we've kind of lost sight of that a little bit. But all through history, that's the essential purpose of that institution. But in every single country, you can see, two lines, moving down, together, side by side, two lines in decline, and that's the marriage rate and the fertility rate. They track each other perfectly in every country you look at. So marriage, so you need a marriage is key, but also early enough marriage. We've gone from cornerstone marriage. Uh, you know, Sociologist and family expert extraordinaire Brad Wilcox, talks about this a lot. The shift from cornerstone marriage, which is two young people, maybe high school sweethearts or college sweethearts, starting at the very beginning of their early on in their life. That's kind of what I had in my, I was 26, my wife was 23. I had a job, but I hadn't accumulated assets or anything like that. But in your 20s, even your early 20s, or in the past, it was, you could be 18 and so you could get married at the beginning of life. Now we have somebody, he's 38, she's 37. He just made partner at his firm. She just won her third award for her medical practice, and now they're 30, 38, 37 years old. Now they're gonna finally talk about getting married. Now they have a couple years of fertility left. They may not even be fertile anymore at all. A lot of people who are infertile in their late 30s or early 40s would have been perfectly fertile in their 20s. So you have this very late shift in marriage. Another point that people don't realize actually is that marriage matters more than before, and the reason is that birth control is so perfect now that that sort of pregnancies of chance, accidental surprises are almost eliminated now because everybody has perfect birth control or very, very early abortion that that kind of covers all surprises. So actually, the fertility rate of non-married people has fallen through the floor, and actually, it's only married people that have kept fertility rates up. And since the share of people that are married has dropped, that's a big driver as well. And connected to that is falling religiosity. So that's another big one. So I have been looking, for years and years to try to find a single, high fertility subculture that doesn't have a religious basis. I have not succeeded. I can't find a single one. So that's a remarkable point. Israel obviously has a religious basis. So I talked about pro-natal belief, but what usually motivates that? What usually gives people a reason? Usually that comes primarily from some kind of faith basis or some kind of belief in in the eternal, or belief in something transcendental beyond ourselves. Because of course the project of having children is a product of transcendence beyond yourself. And do you believe in something greater? That seems to be an enormous factor that we see in the data. And I really want to find some of these subcultures, because most scientists, a lot of tech people are not very religious, and so we want all kinds of people in the future. We don't want we don't want, I think, only the most fundamental religious, but people of faith are the only ones so far that seem to be forming these high fertility subcultures. And then there's another factor which is completely different, but is extremely important as well, which is housing. So maybe you can speak a little bit what you think of housing, and I'll tell you a little bit more, because there's a common misconception. But what is your thought on housing? I'll let you give.
Well, in terms of what aspect, the price of housing, the kinds of housing, it's kind of a broad topic.
Well, yeah, you mentioned price. That's the first thing you mentioned. That's the first thing everybody
Yeah.
thinks about. But actually, it really looks like price is not the biggest factor. And we can know this from East Asia, because East Asia, China, Japan, Korea, they have been building housing like crazy. And a lot of people want to look to that and say, hey, look, they solved their housing problem. But what they're doing is building, towers of apartments. And in East Asian cities where everybody lives in an apartment in a high rise, we're seeing fertility rates of 0.4, 0.5, 0.6. So Seoul's at 0.5. Shanghai is anywhere from 0.4 to 0.5.7. Beijing is around, 0.5. So what we're seeing is that, and these are countries that are building housing like crazy, but what the housing that they're building is, apartments and towers, and that is, it turns out to be very poor for families. And actually, the type of housing that's far better, is a single family home with a little yard. And I could not possibly be more bullish on, single family homes, because, we talk about childcare. Our backyard has been our number one babysitter. You just have to be nearby. The kids can run around, play. Our 3-year-old isn't running around doing God knows what all day long. He knows where we are. He can, he's pushing his trucks and his bulldozers around in the backyard and everywhere else. And if there's a problem, he'll let us know. But he doesn't need like moment by moment adult attention, because we have a yard to play in. And I can't even imagine, if we didn't have that. So that's a huge problem, and that's not appreciated almost at all. I'm almost the only one online that's, trying to talk about housing type, and that matters,
Yeah.
probably from reading me. But it's this, and Lyman Stone also has come around fully 100% to this position. I like to think that I was hammering on this sooner, and I'm gratified. But he had a giant paper as well that found, you know, not only is, a single family home, much better much better for families, but it's actually what everybody wants. So
Well,
so when people
that's
talk,
absolutely true. I mean, yes, there are a small number of people who like living in apartments in a big city. I'm a city guy. I like cities. Now I have a kid. I live in the suburbs in a house, and that's why I'm a little skeptical of this so-called YIMBY movement, the "Yes in My Backyard" movement, that they want to. They think we need to bring down the cost of housing, and the only way to bring it down is to have more supply. The only way to have more supply is to eliminate all these zoning restrictions. And the one that they always hone in on is single family zoning, which is very common in America, where an area is zoned exclusively for single family houses. They don't believe that should be allowed. They think you should be able to build an apartment building anywhere you can build a house. And I don't think it necessarily is killer to have a little corner apartment somewhere. But I also think, if you come into a suburban subdivision full of kids in single family homes, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of apartment buildings in there, it's not just the house that the person lives in, but the whole character of the neighborhood
yeah,
morphs in
that
ways that
I
become a
don't
little less
disagree.
child centric.
Oh yeah, and but one thing is, I plotted it out, in a few charts, and it turns out that the share of apartments in a country is very inversely proportional to its fertility rate. So, um, that really, and you can see also on an individual basis, people who live in apartments have far fewer children, um, than people who live in houses. Um, so urban fertility has just absolutely cratered. And again, this goes down to the fact that, since birth control is perfect now, I mean, everybody's, people are talking about the pill, but that's actually yesterday's news. I mean, what the fastest growing birth control, as far as I know, are IUDs, interuterine devices, which are just a tiny little implant, and then you don't have to think about it,
Hmm.
for 5, 10 years. And you don't have to do anything. You don't have to take a pill every day. You don't have to, one doctor's visit and no thought for the next 5, 10 years. Imagine that. That's the fast. That's so you don't. People are not having children unless they absolutely intend to, and that has to do with having conditions that they view as good. But if we're talking about urban development, the thing that's the real problem is the urban growth boundaries. That's the thing that you really want to knock down. I mean, in the 70s, you had this strong movement to stop urban sprawl, which is these expansion of subdivisions outside of cities. But actually, those subdivisions are one of the most pro-natal things that America has going for it. And the fact that America is a nation of suburbs is the thing that's going to literally help save us, when Europeans and East Asians are all living in little apartments. So that's tremendous. And so that's the thing that you need to be focusing on. There was that book, Ezra Klein, was it Abundance? I think it was called Abundance.
Abundance, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. Yeah.
Yeah, but his picture of what he shows on his cover is like, some dense metropolis. I don't think he's thought that through very clearly, because that architecture, screams, 0.6 fertility rate or something
Hmm.
like that. And the same
Did you
with,
tweet that at them online and see what they say about that?
I did write a critique. I actually criticized also, Brian Kaplan's book, Build, Baby, Build. And I actually had a debate with Brian Kaplan. I don't know if you ever met him. But
I don't. I know who he is though. He's the libertarian
he,
guy,
he's the
Mercatus,
libertarian
right?
guy, Mercatus and Cato and things like this.
Yeah.
Yes. And I actually debated him on housing. He says build, baby, build. But, again, he gets sucked into this trap of these urban high rise, and the cover of Build Baby Build, shows a bunch of apartments, and that looks to me exactly like in a place like Macau, which has a fertility rate of 0.48 or something like that, or Seoul or Shanghai. And these are places, the population, each generation is not half the size of the generation before. Each generation is a quarter of the size of the generation before in these cities. So you have, imagine a population dropping to 1/16 of its size in 60 years. Imagine that. That is just a total collapse, and that's what's going on in these Chinese cities and in these Korean cities and these cities across East Asia, where everybody lives in an apartment in a tower. So we better stay the heck away from that kind of uh, building style, and just give people the thing that they want anyway, which is more suburbs. Just open up more land. Another thing related to that, and I've had some exchanges with Utah Senator Mike Lee about, he's got a Houses Act. The point of that, an interesting thing that has happened in the West is, you may be aware of this, but the federal government, from the Rockies out and further west, the federal government, through the Bureau of Land Management and several other agencies, and also a little bit states as well, but governments own the vast majority of Western lands.
Right.
And so, a state like Utah has had the fastest drop in fertility of any state in the union, and now Utah is like number 5 or something, instead of number 1 like it always was in birth rates. And the biggest reason, I think, is that houses are totally unaffordable now in Utah, and especially if you look at the local incomes, you look at the house prices. The house prices are probably equivalent to what you see here in the Washington D.C. area, but the incomes are flyover country incomes, and so this is a situation where young people cannot buy a house, and meanwhile the federal government owns most of the land. Now it's interesting that there are some MAGA types who think that this is the greatest travesty ever, that Mike Lee wants to go and sell all of our land to the Chinese or something like that. But that's actually nonsense. Actually, putting land in the hands of mainly Americans, mainly our own children and grandchildren, will let them, have their share of the American dream, have families, and actually, that's going to raise up more of the type of people that these MAGA Republicans probably want in the future. And if you actually, a country that is a cautionary tale of what not to do is Canada. Canada has, they're the second largest country by land area in the world, but uh, something like 90% of all land is called crown lands, they call it, which is lands owned by the Canadian federal government and the provinces. And meanwhile, uh, you know, the Canadians who should be like, uh, land holding, pioneers, made of stern stuff, are instead, of a very different character because they're all crammed into cities, living in urban high rises. Canada has, a fertility rate around 1.2 now, and Canada is in steep demographic decline, and everybody's crammed into these tiny little apartments, especially young people, uh, while they on paper have such an abundance of land, but none of that land is developable. And you know people who think that you know that selling federal lands is some uh, left wing globalist conspiracy, couldn't be more badly mistaken. You need, and one of the places where families have been flocking to is the U.S. American South. Country, Georgia, Texas, the whole southeastern United States, because you have been building more and more suburbs and houses are affordable, and Texas is a great example. The economy has been booming. There's this notion, which I think we really need to push back against, which is that to have economic growth, you need more urbanization. That's, you know, the opposite is true. These countries where everybody is crowding into cities and urban high rises, um, are going to have no future.
Well,
What?
suburbs are actually a form of urbanization. They're just a different form than a high rise. So I think you can
Yeah,
have
fair.
urban expansion of new suburbs is urbanization of a sort. Um,
Right, right. And Texas is just a wonderful example that Texas has now probably become the engine of the American economy even more than California. And home of SpaceX, home of the green energy, home of artificial intelligence, and so much else. And our new and our old energy forms. Texas is just a tremendous engine, and people are primarily living in affordable suburbs all across that great state. And that is, you don't need to cram everybody into high rise, and um, that will destroy your future, just because fertility rates in those places are just so low almost everywhere.
yeah.
um,
Now I don't want to go too much down the rat hole of the land thing. I'm actually in agreement with you that if there are federal lands near Salt Lake City, Provo, that or Phoenix or places like that we could sell some of that land to developers. That would be a good thing. I think a lot of the stuff that they want to sell is not contiguous to any existing urban areas, and I don't think it's
I,
going to be turned into affordable housing. I think it's going to be turned into mines, and it's going
I
to be
do have
turned
some.
into
I do have some.
billionaires are
Yeah.
going to take it all over, and they're going to kick the public out. There's been huge issues already in a lot of places with billionaires buying up, all these huge ranches in Idaho, and all of a sudden it's you can't hunt on it. It's like you got to pay huge money to go hunt there, and so I do think there's nuance about what
Yeah, I
lands we
think
want to
that
sell
they need
off.
to figure that out. I mean, one solution that I would say right off the bat, which I'm sure would have like 97% popularity in the United States, is to say that the CCP, should not be able to own, 1 acre of land in the United States. That seems like, I can't imagine any American congressman going against that publicly. Um, so you can make restrictions like that. Yeah, but I do think that we need to think you know, what kind of people are you raising up if, you know, my ancestry goes in the United States all the way back to the Mayflower. That's not as incredible an accomplishment as it seems,
Yeah,
because the Mayflower, because actually
like
there are
30% of the country goes back to the
well,
base. Right now.
roughly 30 million, 35 million people
Some
are direct
some huge, yeah.
descendants of the Mayflower, which is really extraordinary. Which, so the greatest demographic expansion, I think, in the whole history of the world is America from its founding until about 1900. I mean, people had, 7, 8 births per woman for generation after generation after generation. And the thing that accompanied that, they were faithful, that they were people of faith. You had three different great awakenings. You had you had a marriage culture. People married relatively early, but also you had this expansion where people were always, spreading out onto new land, and you had kind of this horizontal expansion, which was a key part of it, that people didn't have to sit on top of each other, but that young man could go west, and I can even see, I can even see, tracing some of my own, ancestral heritage. You can see that now they were in Virginia, now they were out further west, now they were in Indiana, and so forth. So you can actually see the march west. If I'm sure you can do the same thing, if you I don't know how far back your ancestry goes, but I can see that in parts of my family tree, so part of America's incredible demographic expansion, uh, it was really a spreading outward, always, always, always onto new land. Um, and that was forging a certain kind of people too, of an independent, very freedom loving, sort of people. So I think, people who think all the land in the West needs to be in the hands of the federal government, you know, I think that I think we need to. And no, obviously you want to keep your beautiful parks, keep your beautiful monuments. I'm a huge fan of Teddy Roosevelt. He's, absolutely one of my favorite presidents. And these the appreciation of, land for the public, is incredibly important. But also, how much. Desert scrubland does Nevada need? It's not all, beautiful national monuments, or Utah especially. Utah should have, with its, religious basis, it should have a very, very high birth rate. But, it has had the sharpest decline of any of the 50 states, because you just can't, young people cannot buy a house anymore, in Utah, unless you have family wealth or something. Um, so
Well, I think we're kind of we could probably go on forever. I could probably talk here like a Rogan style, 4 hours and stuff. I love rapping about this stuff, but um, I I just want to ask, like, maybe so we could just kind of start wrapping up. Is what do we actually do about this? Because my understanding is pro-natal policies actually have a pretty bad track record. So I know we can build a lot of single family homes and not build a lot of apartments. So it sounds like low density single family homes, more development is good. We know how to do that. Maybe a great awakening of religion would be good, but it's not clear how we would trigger such a thing.
yeah, no, these are
What
these are
what
wonderful
what
questions.
policies?
Yeah.
What policies? Because I know there's been like South Korea and these people they've realized they've had a huge problem and they've pumped enormous sums of money into trying to boost their birth rate to no effect. Basically, even Lyman Stone can't come up with a whole lot. It's like, yes,
Well,
in
yeah.
Georgia, the patriarch promised to personally baptize every third child if you had one. But there's not. We're fresh out of patriarchs here. You know what I mean?
I hear it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I'm. You're talking to the right person, because I think I'm trying to think outside the box more than anybody. And Lyman and I, we communicate like probably almost every day on different, uh, you know, channels, just because we're on demographic, uh, you know, discussion groups and so forth. So we're just interacting in that world. But I have a he's really focused on, child allowances and benefits of that sort, which I think, one point is that he may be like in campaign mode, like there's budgets with this stuff like live right now, and so he wants to focus on that particular thing, to get that in there. So that's kind of a campaign mode type thing, but I don't talk about that very much, because I don't think that's anywhere near the most effective thing. It's not bad. I don't think that's a negative thing. Um, but I don't think these are not the biggest things. I mean, I think what I would call the lowest hanging fruit of all in terms of solving the fertility crisis is educating, young people in high school and in college, but especially in high school and in sex ed. You need to be telling people, you know, you need to be terrifying young people about their fertility window and the fact that, 1/3 or 40% of the people in the room, probably, 90% plus will tell you that they want children. You know, at least a third of those will never have children because they in the end it will be because they waited too long and didn't focus on that highly enough when they were young. So I think so I think education about the fertility window most of all, but also another piece is that a lot of people don't realize this, but there's an organization called Population Connection. And do you know who is you know who the founder of Population Connection is?
No, I'm not familiar with that group.
No, it's Paul Ehrlich himself, and
Okay.
this is a group that educates tens of thousands of teachers about the risks of overpopulation, and those teachers turn around and miseducate, millions, tens of millions of students about the terrifying overpopulation problem that we don't have.
We're still
So
doing that. So
we're still
these are
doing
still,
that.
yeah.
And
Oh,
there's this organization, and
oh
this
yeah.
is
No, I vaguely heard about that. Maybe we
this
should
is
stop doing that.
yeah. So stop telling kids to have less children. That first stop digging.
Right.
But and one thing that's related to this, I hate to say it, but the political left is a whole lot more willing to spend actual money on the things that they believe in. I mean, there are probably almost no grifters on the right, and do you know why?
Yeah, because there's no money in it. I bet there's
There's
no
no money.
billionaire paying you to say this, is there?
No, there's no, nobody. No, exactly. I mean, some people. I mean, based on the scope of the problem, I mean, this is going to, cost the global economy, uh, you know, tens of trillions of dollars at least. Only compounding. Of the economy is 100 trillion, and so, but there are no organizations in the United States that are that have heavy. There's the Institute for Family Studies. Hats off to them, but they operate on a shoestring budget. You know,
And
and
it's
any of
more of
these.
a academic slash media organization too. It's not an actual organization doing things.
Right. And so where there's a lot of education organizations focused on population control, and kids are getting these messages in schools, and I think their parents would be horrified. That they're learning to have less children in school. So and there are no organizations on the pro-natal side that do any of this. So that's your, you know so there's problem number one. Uh, they're talking about some other things. You can educate. I think it's fine to educate young people, even in public schools, about marriage too, and the benefits thereof. I think you can structure the tax code to favor marriage. I think that's um, religious freedom is a really, really big one, and one reason why America's demographic situation is much less severe than it is in Europe or East Asia. China is desperate about their population crisis and their demographic collapse, and they're also at the same time, uh, repressing religion still, and stamping out, and demanding total control, and
Mm.
still. So Japan too. Japan was uh, probably, you know, maybe the number one persecutor of Christianity in, several hundred years ago, 16, 1700s. I don't know if you know the history of that,
Yeah, yeah.
but but actually Christianity was blossoming in a very powerful way in Christianity in Japan, and that was uh, stamped out entirely, but by uh, very brutal methods. If you know the history there,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
Japan is repressive of religion to this day, even while their leaders, talk about this is our last chance, and they talk about it, about the demographic crisis, with sincere desperation. And Japan has every reason to be desperate about this problem, and yet they continue to persecute faith groups. It's remarkable. So religious freedom is a really big one. School choice is all, Catherine Pakalik. I don't know if you've ever met her, um,
Mm-mm.
but she's I'll talk about her a little bit more in a moment. But yeah, she has recommended that as a government intervention, just allow people to have school choice, and that will allow more parents to choose religious schools, and have a better chance of passing on their faith traditions. Because as I said, I've looked the world over. I cannot find a single, in any developed country, any high fertility subgroup that doesn't have a religious basis. I mean, we can think of the groups that we can think in the United States that,
The
you know,
Amish,
yeah,
the
Orthodox
Orthodox
Jews,
Jews. Yeah.
yeah, trad Caths,
Mm.
or the Mormon version of traditionalists.
Yeah.
You've got that. They all have a religious basis. Every group that you can think of. You've got some weird ones out. I don't want to say weird, but anyway, that we're not familiar with, like the Hutterites.
Yeah.
But every group that you find that has high fertility, they seem to everyone have a religious basis. So that it remains to be seen if groups can develop that can have healthy birth rates without that. But so that's another one. Again, getting rid of this antenatal environmental messaging, certainly in schools, but just in culture generally. Um, this idea, and here's a little thought experiment that I like to, I want people to think about, which is, we talk about how we have to, a lot of people think that you have to have fewer people to save the environment. But imagine an alien spacecraft came to Earth. An alien biologist, an extraterrestrial biologist, shows up. What is the most interesting thing on our planet? Is it the lichen?
Mm.
Is is it the fish? It's us.
Mm-hmm.
Humanity is the most interesting thing in the global ecosystem. We're part of nature too, and we are. Uh, you know, you have to step out of our frame and look at what Earth looks like to some extraterrestrial scientist. The thing that they would be most excited about is the same thing that we would be most excited about if we're exploring the stars. You know, if we came across a planet and there's some like interesting form of lichen on the rocks or something, I guess that's kind of interesting, sort of, but that's not remotely as exciting as if there's, you know, intelligent, cognizant, thinking beings out there. So the environmental counterpoint is actually that it's us that is the coolest thing, in our ecosystem. So I think so here we've explored a few different pronatal things that are hardly talked about. Another point that I didn't mention yet is research. Would you believe that almost all demographic research is funded by the antenatal population control side?
I believe it. Well,
Yeah,
that's
no,
all
it's
the
it's
big lefty
astonishing.
foundations. It's
They so again, if we want to solve this, the left has been opening up its wallet on every issue to the tune of billions of dollars for years. So there is exceedingly little pronatal research. I went to a conference of the world's leading conference on demography. It's called PAA, the Population Association of America. It actually draws people from all over the world. But and we've got this issue of global demographic collapse. You would think this would be their moment, but no. They're all like, they all come up, they have grown up, uh, drinking the milk of population control for their entire careers. And pro-natal demographers are precious few, because that's not where they come from. That's not who's been funding them. So funding, and I've tried to put out research such as it is, and and Lyman Stone for this, has been incredible in his own little way, talking about different things that drive birth rates. But we should have major studies financed in a major way on what on how to solve this. And I talk about housing, but where are all the studies showing what kind of housing is associated with higher birth rates? I'm not nearly as credible as somebody who plows through $10 million doing a study of tens or hundreds of thousands of people. So we need to do the real work, that can the real demographic work to find out what these drivers are, and to solve this in a real way. So that's another big policy point.
Well, if there are any potential funders out there, maybe they can take that and start putting money in that direction. It's undoubtedly true that I don't even know if there's really a conservative liberal divide per se, but if you look at it, like, if you code pronatalism as conservative, which it shouldn't be, but probably it is, the left is definitely outspending it like 100 to 1 on
Oh yeah,
most
exactly.
of the big issues. So again, my guest today has been Daniel Hess. He writes the website and the Twitter handle More Births. As you can tell, he's passionate about raising birth rates. And again, he is buying his own product, eating his own dog food. Has 6 kids, and so he knows what it's all about. There's links to his material in the show notes. Dan, thanks you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Thank you.